Welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. I'm your host, Ed Reniger. My guests today are Adam Walls and John Flach. They have been on the show before. Before they were introducing us to a book that they had jointly written called Do Systems Exist? Let me get that clarity there. There we go. They come at this from two different perspectives, and so they are having a conversation in this book. And it's a comprehensive book, and it's very simple at the same time, filled with stories and examples. And and the question is, what is a system? And how do we understand a system? How do we think like in terms of a system? And their their list of chapters is, as you can see here, a systems perspective, wicked change, making sense, context matters, variety is vitality, substitution myth. You get the idea. All of these are current topics of conversation that I have with people all over the world and have been for, well, almost 30 years. The language has changed, but the issues that we face in organizations has not changed. And so when John and Adam came out with their book, immediately I got a hold of it and I invited them on, and we did an initial conversation 2 or 3 months ago. And then I invited him to come back, and the idea is to dig deeper into this book because I think is that has that kind of value. So we will have about an hour with them today. Then we'll probably come back and we'll probably look at more specifics about what they're talking about in the future. But I think you're going to find this interesting. I encourage you to get a hold of the book. It is one that I think would be a very good complement to my book, The Circle of Impact: Taking Personal Initiative to Ignite Change. I think we're addressing similar issues, which is why are organizations not functioning well? And a lot of it has to do with how they're structured and or how they're designed, what the model is. So we're talking very much same things, but the three of us are coming from different directions. And I really like the book that they've done. So that's why we're doing this today. I hope you will find it interesting. Please hit the like button, subscribe both on YouTube and Substack to what I'm offering through the podcast. And I hope that today will be hope today will be worthwhile for you. And we'll talk some more after they've been with us. Thank you. And here we are with John and Adam. It's really good to have you, Adam Walls and John Flach, with me today. And I look forward um, to talking about your book. And let me share your book. And there it is. Do Systems Exist? A conversation. Uh, we've already had one session, where we've talked about the book in very general terms, but let's dig into this from the standpoint of why this is important. Why is it important for us to be talking about systems today? What is it um, that provoked you to want to do this as, and I'm suggesting as a solution to a problem that you may perceive as existing?
For me, because the current way of perceiving business is very ineffective at helping business to achieve its goals.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of defining everything, standardizing everything, making everybody follow those standards, and managing people to those standards is the opposite of how to run a complex adaptive system. This idea that you can define everything to little boxes with two words in that define the things, and everybody follow that. If they don't follow that, they get punished.
Where did the idea that was a way to organize businesses or any kind of organization? Where'd that idea come from? That standardization idea?
It's part of McKinsey's 7S, I believe. And obviously Lean came and dropped its trousers on it. And a lot of reductionist thinkers think that by reducing everything to a few small instructions, they can de-skill work. There's an awful lot of consultancies who offer or who project that all of their costs can be recovered by doing this work. And so they're basically cost neutral, no matter how much they cost. An awful lot of people getting up on stage and talking rubbish about how business operates and how things can be defined. And if you don't define things, it's, you know, you're missing out somehow. I spent I said that from about 2000 to 2005 mapping processes. And I mapped the entirety of Orange customer service processes. For what? I don't know. So that people know what to do, I guess, instructions.
Well,
But no, they got turned into cages that they put the CSRs in.
is this
and they managed
a matter of creating mechanisms for control?
Yeah, this idea of control, this idea that if you have control of your people, you have control of the things they do, you have control of your business somehow. But control is a fantasy, right? It's not a in life, we don't expect to control life. We can't even tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, yet business seem to think that they need to project their plans 3, 6, 12 months into the future.
John,
and if they don't turn out that way, then it's planning's fault.
In your world, what does this look like?
Well, to go to your original question, I mean, the motive for me is there's a huge literature and a lot of thinking on complex systems over the last 20 years. And we've really, my background is psychology, but our idea of what cognitive systems are and how humans behave have changed radically and been influenced a lot by nonlinear dynamics and so we've always been looking at humans within organizations and systems. So there's a huge literature, and the motivation for me for this book is that I think that literature is too important to remain in academic circles. Mm. And for me, engaging with Adam was an opportunity to talk about the practical value of some of these ideas and how those can potentially be implemented in organizations. So for me, and that reflects both the style of the book, using Fred's cartoons and the conversation, engaging Adam in a conversation, was to broaden the conversation to include the people who are actually managing systems. So my sense is there's a lot of discussion in academics. There's been a lot of change, and I think with the evolution of nonlinear dynamics, our view of the human mind, of human behavior, has changed dramatically from stimulus response to mechanized control systems to self-organizing systems, and I think those have very implications for how we think, how we do business. But my sense is that from observation outside of academia, it seems like a lot of people are throwing around these words and ideas. But when I look at the behaviors and look at the actions, it suggests to me that they really don't understand what these words, the implications, the practical implications of systems theory. So for me, I'm a retired academic, and I just want to broaden the conversation to include more than my academic colleagues and my students. I want people in industry and business who actually are struggling with these problems to at least start asking the right questions. And again, we emphasized over and over again, this is not about the answers, because as Adam indicated, the world is complex. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and things are changing all the time, constantly adapting. And so ideas of mechanism, the mechanism is always out of date because the world around it is changing. So you need not the organization can't function. If it functions as a mechanism, it's going to quickly be outdated. The organizations have to function as organisms, which are constantly adapting to their ecology. And, mechanisms are quickly extinct. Yeah. Organisms can adapt and they survive the transitions around them.
I like all this very much, and I like what you all have done, and I think you're right on the money. What I see two things. Let me give you two things. When I became a consultant 30 years ago, I had never been a consultant, never had a business course, and had an accounting course and failed that. That was the only course I've ever failed, was an accounting course. I laugh about that now. But I became a consultant because I saw problems that need to be solved, and I knew how to solve problems. And what I found was that the structure of organizations, this thing that you all are talking about, was resistance to change. And it was so resistant that you could predict the failure or the demise of not just individual organizations, but the whole system that is organized. And I think that's what we're seeing today. But this is the second thing I saw, the people who saw it clearly were not the managers, but the workers. Because the workers were the ones that really had to work within that system, and they knew that it didn't work. And when I talked with average people work behind a desk or even mop floors, you talk about what's going on with the company, and they tell you something that the managers would never tell you, which is, well, we got good people that work here, but we're not really allowed to do really good work. And so it seems like we're in a moment of transition. And you use some language in this book, which I think is really helpful for people to understand. And I'm looking at your table of contents, and you have a chapter called Wicked Change, and then you have another chapter called Context Matters, another chapter called Emergence. These are all really important ideas, and if we could take those three ideas of wicked change, context, and emergence, and talk about those during this time we have today, I think it would really be benefiting a lot of people who may not have ever really come across these terms in a way that makes sense to them. How does that sound?
Yes.
We shouldn't get. So one of the problems is sometimes the language, that we like these new words and things, but they don't communicate effectively. But based on what you said, the one thing that Adam's stories bring home, I think, very clearly, is when there are problems in an organization, the answers are generally in the organization, and the a good consultant, if he talks to the right people and if he listens to the people, they can generally tell you what the problem is. And often the problem is that the people who are supposedly in control, the managers, are not listening to the workers as Ed, you clearly manage. And the other thing is, it's interesting that you failed accounting, but the thing that you see in organizations is managers are very good at managing the spreadsheets, the accountant spreadsheets. But the problem is, and maybe these spreadsheets were representative of the world at one point, but oftentimes in dynamic environments, key aspects of the problem, of the situation, of the ecology, of the problems that the organizations need to solve are not represented in the spreadsheets that they created yesterday or 10 years ago. And so to be sensitive to those changes, if you're only looking at the business through the spreadsheet, you're not going to see those changes. And then you're not going to be able to adapt to those changes.
100 years ago, 150 years ago, we were in a much more linear kind of environment, but now we're not. We're in a complex environment. When did that change begin to happen?
Well, it's always happening, but I mean, modern history. I mean, the greatest example is, the Ford, and Henry Ford controlled the markets, and he could, dictate that people could have whatever car they wanted as long as it's black, because he controlled the markets. He also, in the assembly lines, he controlled the sources of his products and stuff, so they could create big buffers, so to avoid problems, so that the assembly line, so the workers in the assembly line were just another brick in the wall, because their jobs were reduced to the very, very simplest thing to do. So the assembly line, and then the most important thing was to keep the assembly line going. But then you get the Japanese and coming up with flexible manufacturing, and people like Tachiono and things like that, who gave workers the power to stop the assembly line, and who realized that, generating 100 cars with flaws is not productivity. And so he gave the workers in the Toyota production system the capacity to stop the line if they saw any problem. And the line didn't get started until they solved that problem. In the US, in the old, Ford manufacturing system, the only one who could stop the assembly line were the high-level managers. And so they would pass off cars with defects, would go down the assembly line, and the managers would be unaware, and then you're producing 100 flawed cars because they didn't recognize the problem. But that's the whole thing, is the systems that change and adapt. The environment is always becoming, in competitive environments, in sports and things, if you don't adapt to your competition, you're not going to be in Wimbledon. You have to play up to the highest game, and so it's the ability to detect, to sense the changes around you and respond to those changes has always been fundamental to life. I mean, it was fundamental when we were moving across the frontier in the U.S. and Europeans had to adapt to a new country and changes. It's seen more recently in changes in manufacturing, but now we have information economy, now we have AI, and in fact the pace of change, the change has always been there, but the pace is only increasing with information technologies. And so the lifespan of your spreadsheet is shorter than ever, in a sense. Once you fix the spreadsheet, it's going to be out of date much faster today than it was, 50 years ago.
Adam, in your experience, do you find that I'm really asking a psychological question, that because of the complexity, because of these things that you all describe, that it kind of drives people to seek for what is the most comfortable place to reside in. And even if there are problems, they're going to allow the problems to exist because They are more comfortable with having the problems than solving them.
Okay. I believe this is built on a misconception, a fundamental misconception that goes all the way back to Fred Taylor, Winslow Taylor, back in whenever it was, 1902 or something,
Right.
measuring pig iron. And this idea of scientific management, and this idea that you can break a task into its little components and measure each one and then optimize a bit of it, and then that will save time here, and then people will somehow be more productive. And this was all wrapped up in the Ford, the idea that, oh, he's created this new way of manufacturing stuff, and therefore manufacturing thinking is obviously the most successful, and so this is what we need. And Fred jumped on that with his book on scientific management. Actually, Fred was fired because he cost more than he saved. And he went home and wrote the book and published it himself because he was independently wealthy, saying how successful he'd been. And that is where scientific management comes from. It's absolute rubbish. It's based on rubbish. I mean, it's based on Gilbreth's tabletop experiments and this idea that you can model things, and they demonstrate things. And they were very good at that. And they created these nice narratives that explain things really nicely. And then the knowledge then gets based on that as a truth. And this is really one of the things I wanted with the book, was grounding. This book is grounding. This is what real is. For me, these are truths.
Yeah.
Fred Taylor's scientific management is not a truth. It's an opinion. It was written for an agenda, and it has nothing to do with what successful management of systems looks like. It is very good at explaining away managering, if you like, and this idea of productivity being something that we should seek. Add to that Friedman in the 70s saying that the only thing you got to worry about is shareholder value, and that's it. So that really fits nicely with this idea that you can manage people to production and therefore drive profits to your shareholders. If we can just reduce the price of these people and make them cost nothing, we can push all of that money to our shareholders, which is the only thing we have to do. And it's a very much A plus B equals C thinking. And to a greater extent, that's what business have done ever since. And consultancies have come in and sold this myth as well. That we can standardize everything, and by standards, you have people doing the same thing, and customers will receive the same thing, and they'll pay for it, and then we can reduce the cost of those things by outsourcing them or offshoring them to cheaper and cheaper locations. Nobody paying attention to the fact that as you stretch these things over bigger and bigger distances, they become weaker and weaker and weaker. And as you atomize management in this matrix hell, which is another consultancy tool to make nobody responsible for anything. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. I worked for a bank, and a massive telecoms company, not a bank, and they had to build servers. And they had to build, I can't remember how many it was, but they had to build a bunch of servers every month just to stand still. Let's say 800 a month. And they were 2 months behind. And if they got one more month behind, the whole system would collapse. And so I said, well, what do you do to build servers? So, okay, we get the high-level requirements, the low-level requirements, the technical requirements, the infrastructure requirements, the capability requirements, the blah, blah, the finance, the ROI, and then we get all this stuff together, and then somebody does a design and a low-level design and all that stuff. And this takes months. So it takes 6 months to build one server. And that includes a procurement cycle to go out and buy the hardware once you've proved the ROI. And every single server goes through this. And so I asked the question, how many of these servers are virtual? He said, all of them. So why are you doing a procurement cycle? Why are you doing technical designs? Why are you doing anything? Why don't you just get a guy building you a bunch of virtual servers and just allocate them as... And it had never occurred to them. Literally never occurred to them. So they were going off a cliff because it never occurred to them to stop. and just go, hang on a minute, is this the best way to build servers? And the funny thing was that there was a guy in Australia who had a job in this process. And so it doesn't matter where the servers were. They always went to this guy in Australia to sign something or approve something or something like that. Because McKinsey had turned up, I think it was McKinsey had turned up and atomized the process. So nobody was actually paid to do the job anymore. And therefore the job was free. And therefore McKinsey paid for themselves by getting rid of all the people who were paid to do this.
Wow.
And this craziness, this is crazy, right? But this is just one. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of stories like this, where you turn up and you go, well, have you thought about this? Now, often the result is get out. Get out. If we wanted a simple answer like that, I'd have come up with it. And it's a kind of an aim for anything that might actually solve the problem. And actually, problem itself is a thing, right? So problem is problems to be solved, you wrote. That's why you became a consultant. And this is the problem. There are no problems to be solved. There are emergent factors which are not things we like. And they will be emergent because of other things. But if I solve that problem, I've just created a problem somewhere else because I've never thought about this systemically and thought, is this the best way to build servers? Can I take 10 minutes out of the server building process so we're 10% more effective? No, just don't do it at all. That would be much more effective and just do a completely different thing. I think the question you asked about the psychology, the psychology is led by beliefs. And a lot of managers believe that they have to control their people or they'll look bad.
Mm-hmm.
And control is a fantasy. And every manager knows that. And every single manager is in pain because they can't control reality. All they can do is make up numbers and put them in spreadsheets to make their boss think that there is an element of control. And basically, it's a game of charades all the way up, which, one more thing, is why none of the numbers in a business make any sense. None of them. They're all made up. Every time you look at a number, every time you look at a dashboard, it's made up with numbers, and those numbers are believed because they're numbers. If I go and ask somebody their opinion about something, say, how bad is this? And they go, oh, it's really bad. It's a 5 out of 10. That's not believed. But if there's a number in a box on the spreadsheet that says 8, somebody will go, well, that should be 7. Let's do an investigation. Not that guy's just told you how bad it is and where the problem is. Yeah, but he might have an opinion. He might have there will be a reason that he's lying or whatever. So it's not just psychology. It's how we relate to each other, full stop. If I listen to somebody tell me a story, I can tell whether they're lying. If I look at a number, I can't tell whether that number's a lie. So we have to do data lineage and all that rubbish. Can I just ask somebody? So for me, there's no simple answer to your question. It's not about psychology. It's not about problems. It's about the fundamental belief systems of how people believe business works, which is people do work. If I can make them work harder for less, I make more money.
So it sounds like that what we're dealing with is a global system, global not in the planetary sense, but a huge system that envelops everything, where the people who are in control or who are in charge are dictating how we're going to approach all of this, and the people who are tasked with responding to what the manager is saying do see things differently. And that's what I have discovered is, and I already said this morning as we've talked, but it amazes me how resistant to change that this system that has been created is. And maybe that's its genius, is that it is so resistant to change. But if you look at, take your book and these 10 chapters and you read through that, what you see is sort of freedom, liberation. You're liberating people to use their own minds and use their own sense of proportion, use their own capacity to make sense of things. I mean, all these things are right here in this wonderful little book that you all have created. And if people were to take this and talk about it with each other, they would find, I don't think what they would find is something new. I think they would find language that affirms what they've already known. And I think that we're at a transition point where this old way of doing things is becoming under such scrutiny that it's going to have to change or it dies.
I think what I see is change projects. Change projects are evidence of a lack of requisite variety. So you have an operation, it works, and then it doesn't work, something breaks, something's not right. Well, that means there's been a shift in the environment.
Right.
And what hasn't happened is this hasn't adapted to that shift. So you have a change project, and the change project goes into PO, it goes into speccing, it goes into requirements gathering, it goes into a PM and a ROI calculation, business cases, and all this stuff, right? Meanwhile, meanwhile, it's still a problem. And
Right.
then while that's going on, the environment shifts again, and then you have another change project, and another change project, another change project. So for me, it's very simple. Look at the place in the business with all the change projects. That's got requisite variety issues.
Yeah.
So how do you get that to a place where it's not like that? Well, stop doing change projects. First thing you do, you just project a VSM on it. You just project a viable systems model on it. Identify the 5 people in there who are your viable system in that thing, capability, or whatever you want to call it. And ask them to talk about the things that they should be talking about in the VSM. And from that will emerge what needs to be done. You don't need 20 change projects. That's just trying to deal with last year's problem or the year before's problem or the year before's problem. You're in a completely different reality already. Ask the people what needs to be done and get them to do it now, not in a year's time when you've signed off the ROI and you've got approval from God. And that's how you create adaptive organizations. You make each part of the organization a VSM and you get them talking and you get them to identify what needs to be done and you get them to crack on and do it. And keep doing it. Keep talking, keep identifying things, keep bringing in the changes. And the thing will adapt around those 5 perspectives, which are like grounding points. Because I noticed the other day that no business model has any grounding. Every business model you can think of, every framework that does a business model has no grounding in it. It's just words that people put into boxes, like a template on a whiteboard.
What do you mean by grounding? What do you mean by grounding?
Okay, so the viable systems model has grounding. We know that we all operate that way. There is an intelligence of looking out. There is a control of your resources. There is a coordination of your running, jumping. There is a operation of moving around, and there is a policy. Well, those 5 perspectives have to exist and have to communicate flawlessly with each other for it to be a viable system. Well, that's grounding right there. So what other business model, apart from that, has that sort of grounding? None of them. I've been looking at them. There is literally nothing. There's a segment, customer segments. What customer segments do we use? Based on what? Well, based on what I've just thought of. And I've now written on the board and my post-its have gone up and that now becomes and what value propositions do we deliver to those customer segments that we just invented? And what value streams do we deliver to those? And it's just made up stuff. It doesn't mean anything. It's fantasy.
It reminds me of when I went through the process of putting my Circle of Impact book together and had this many months long conversation with this group that I'd hired to help me do that. And They wanted to know who my marketing um, uh, archetype was, or my, that's not what, um, it's a different word. But they want to know who I was marketing the book to. They said, is it for
Oh,
the
the niche.
niche?
The niche. Yeah, we had the same conversation.
CEO, the CIO, the COO, the HR. I said, it's not for any of those. It's for people
No.
who transition. And they said, well, that's too broad. I says, it's not too broad
Yeah,
if you're in transition. It's exactly what you know you're experiencing. And
exactly
that's
that
why
problem.
this is valuable to you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and everything I've seen in the 6 years since it's published, that's really those are the people who wanted that book, and have they found value there because it was designed for them. It was, and CEOs don't want to read the book because it doesn't support the kinds of things that you guys have described, which is let's just keep doing it the way we've always done it. We'll figure it out as we go along. Well, it works until it doesn't work, and it doesn't work. And once it doesn't work, it's really difficult to restore that. So I,
It's really hard. It's really hard to predict what your business is going to be next year.
oh
Now,
yeah,
if you think it's going to be what it is this year, you're probably already screwed unless you're Coca-Cola, right? One product. Okay. So either you change and evolve and emerge with a new product, or you change and emerge your product to something better or more, but you are adapting to the environment.
that's right.
That's all you're doing. You're just adapting to the environment. Now, if you are taking 5 years to come to market with your product, or as Marks and Spencer's famously do, 18 months from a sketch to into the shops, and Zara are doing it in 2 weeks, who wins?
Thorough.
Zara do. And yeah,
Yeah.
they make their clothes out of rubbish and they throw away after a year, but it's fashion now that people want to wear and then throw away. Marks and Spencers make knickers that last for 10 years, right? What audience are you serving? You go to Marks and Spencers to buy your pants, and you go to Zara to buy your dresses. I don't know.
And it
It
doesn't
each has.
matter. It doesn't matter what size or what complexity of your organization you have. You could be a one-person business like me, or you could have 150,000 employees. It's the same story.
Well, the bigger the organization, the more likely it is that everybody is working against it. That's what I found. So I know this will feel weird to anybody listening who runs a big corporation, but I've seen such toxic behavior in massive organizations that couldn't exist in small organizations, of people who say things like, I don't care if we lose a customer because I don't care if the CEO gets another coat of paint in their yacht. I don't get anything for it. Now, I worked in an organization where that was standard. Everybody was working against the organization. Everybody was trying to extract as much value for themselves out of their job. And that meant free time, as much money, screwing their expenses, I suspect, whatever it took to get as much for themselves. And that behavior went all the way up to the top, because the CEO sat there on his 20, 30, 40, 50 million a year, crying over the fact that, this £100,000 customers walked out the door.
Or he wasn't
Who
making
cares?
a million.
Who cares, right?
Yeah. So, John, from an academic perspective, how do you see all of this that Adam's describing? What's your take on this?
So the people who started general systems thinking, people like Akoff, they were very good modelers first. So they actually, started the field of operations research for management, and they built these models, and they're very sophisticated modelers. And if you look at a lot of the technical books on systems thinking, you'll have collections of models, and they show you about models and block diagrams and things like this. But general systems theory was a step away from operations research. When Akoff realized, he said that, we take these models into businesses and we generally discover that there are factors that are not in our models that have significant impact. And so, the way I see it is, but unfortunately what happens is it's very easy to teach the models. And we have departments of operations research to teach engineers and managers how to manipulate models. And the people who are teaching it are true believers in the models, and the students become true believers in the models. And they mistake the models for reality. Okay. And the whole spirit of general system thinking was don't trust your models because the world is more complex than any model. And Adam is a chef, and it's one what we have is a lot of people who come out of universities and management schools with lots of recipes, and they can follow the recipes. But to be a chef, you need to go into a kitchen and take whatever happens to be in the refrigerator that day and come up with something that's good, palatable. And that's the difference between, and the chefs build the recipes. So Akoff built a lot of Operation Verada, built the models and stuff. But he also understood that the recipes were not reality. And that, anybody can follow the recipe if they have all the ingredients. But what do they do when they don't have the right ingredients? Do they know what to substitute? Do they know how to adapt to what's in the kitchen? And successful management, and this is a difference between mechanism and organism. The recipes represent mechanisms. So, but a skill and ability to adapt, that's what differentiates organisms from mechanisms. The organisms can rewrite the mechanism is going to work the same way, independent of the environment. It's independent from the environment. It's built. Your watch is going to work the same way every day. It doesn't matter. Okay, but your internal clock is going to adapt to situations, and sometimes it'll run fast, and sometimes it'll run, as you become more skilled, you can actually slow down things so that you can do things that seem very fast but are not. But you can use the time much more effectively, and so that's the difference. And the problem I see as an academic is it's really easy to teach the recipes.
Yeah.
And so, to me, one of the biggest kind of so I'm coming from psychology, but we applied psychology and we're looking at human systems and management, decision making and stuff. And and I have but in the process of doing this, I've read a lot in systems thinker, the classical work on systems thinking. But we had an opportunity whenever I've had an opportunity to work with systems engineers. One is I discover that they've never read Akoff or Bernard Lamphy or any of the big thinkers in systems thinking. And they all have some model in their back pocket. It's like the accountant's spreadsheet. And they trust their model more than their eyes. That is, when they go out, so you can talk to the organizations and stuff, but if you can only hear the things that fit into your model, then oftentimes you're going to miss the cues that would allow you to make things better, improve that, because you're not listening effectively. You're not listening. You've got to understand the situation. And if only you can see it's, the models are decomposable, the models have their categories. They have, a spreadsheet is a model, essentially. The models depend on countability. So the only things that can go into the model are the things you can count. And that's why there's a imperialism of numbers. And so that's what, that was the revelation to me, was that systems engineers don't know anything about systems thinking, what I consider system thinking.
Mm-hmm.
They all come out armed with a collection, of models, and they might have some variety. Some of them have one model that they apply to everything. A few might have a couple different models. but it's like it's like a comment about your book. They have their categories. Okay, if this category, this model, that category, this model. But if something doesn't fit a category, then they don't know what to do. And they're most likely to do is ignore the differentials to the category and push it into a category and then apply the model for that category.
And it seems like the person who reads the first book and that becomes the gospel for them, and it becomes everything, and all of a sudden they have restricted their whole perspective on something which has this wide applicability to something very small because, oh, I really like this guy. I like Akoff, or I like, Singy, or I like, and so everything gets funneled through that filter, and it doesn't work that way. My goal was always to help people think independently, to think, to draw upon other people's thought, but to think independently because they're sitting in the context. This is one of your chapters. They're in a context which is not defined by anything outside of that context. They're in that context and they have to figure out, what am I going to do? And
Yeah.
they could have, I have, a shelf over there that's got 50 books on it. They could have read all 50 of those books and still don't have an idea of what to do. So
Yeah.
I
So
think
yeah.
that's one of the realities that we should enjoy.
Yeah. And that's the analogy of the chef. I mean, the context is what's in your kitchen.
Right.
Okay. And you can have a book full of recipes, but if you don't have the ingredients that match one of the recipes, what do you do? And its ability, and again, that's the difference between mechanism. The AI can have all the recipes in the world, but the question is, does it know what to substitute? Do they know if they don't have the recipe, how they adapt to what's in the kitchen? How do they take what's in the kitchen? And the businesses, you don't get to choose the kitchen you live in. It's a competitive environment, and the kitchen is changing. What foods are available depends upon the seasons, depends upon the market, depends upon your budget. And the question is, are you prepared to make something succeed when there is no recipe to match your particular context? And that's the difference. Again, the modelers come out of college with lots of recipes.
So I have two questions and we have about 15 minutes left.
Sorry, just one thing I just want to revisit quickly.
Yes, please.
What John's talking about then is people, right? Coming out with models, and they go into an environment where they want to be seen as successful.
Yes.
Because that's how they get more work. And so what does success look like? Well, it means being liked. It means fitting in. It means entering the environment and kind of ingratiating yourself in the environment. Very few companies want somebody coming in disrupting them. They want somebody that will fit in and make the changes that they're sensitively, without startling any horses, and then not allowed to say, I don't know. So a consultant can't turn up and the boss goes, right, this is the problem. What do you want to do? So I don't know. That's actually the correct answer, because then that opens the floor to every model. But they have to bring out their model. No, what we're going to do now is we're going to have a workshop and we're going to do this. And I'm already down my model. I'm already pushing people into my approach because I have to be seen to be productive. And it's back to Taylorism. It's back to productivity. It's back to being seen to produce things. Look at enterprise architects. Spend weeks and weeks and weeks producing massive volumes of things, pictures and representations and business capability models. I mean, they map the entire business capability model, all 200 business capabilities, go to the business and say, there you go. And the business go, I don't care. No, of course they don't. It's not their metaphor. And actually, business capability should just be cast on the business by the enterprise architect to make sense of the business for themselves. But because they've got to be seen to be productive, they've got to produce this thing and give it to the business and say, I've done this.
And the thing is the models are quite sophisticated, and the culture believe, it's not just that the modelers believe it, but we're in a culture that authority, if it's a very sophisticated model and only this consultant runs a model and you can't fit the model, who do you trust? The guy with all this mathematics sophistication who can run his simulations and stuff, or do you trust the janitor who's been on the company for 30 years and have watched people succeed and fail in this business and knows it from the inside out? And the thing is, and this, because of our culture and our belief in these models, and it's sort of from the success of the linear and the success of the forward and the success of these reductionist views in the past, they have authority. So when the person gets in the kitchen and the food don't match the recipe, the ingredients aren't available for the recipe, he blames the kitchen. He doesn't blame his model. He blames the kitchen. It's the kitchen's fault because, whoa, this is a poorly stocked kitchen. So no wonder you can't get anything good to eat here because the kitchen doesn't have the right ingredients. So, so you go out. So what they do is, rather than fix you a meal, they send you out to the grocery store to get the things that fit into their model, when you probably have, very good food. And then the food that you have in the refrigerator goes bad and spoils while you're at the store. So
I actually have a very good example of exactly that. McKinsey, again, my favorite consultancy, were bought in to write a strategy for a company, and they spent £600,000 on the strategy, a very voluminous document for sure. And then the company were given the strategy, and then McKinsey left, and the company said, yeah, we can't use it because we're not mature enough. Right there. So they spent £600,000 on a useless engagement, which produced nothing of value, and blamed themselves. Well, that's victim blaming. They're the victims of a consultancy that have taken advantage of them and ripped them off, and they blame themselves because of the that's the name. They wouldn't make a mistake. Nobody gets fired for bringing them in. Okay, with their models.
So here's the question that this is my question because this is my world. But I think it's an important question because if what I see happening, let me back up. What you're telling us, both of you guys, in your book, is confirmation to me of what I've seen for 25, 30 years. And that's why I really like it. And I think people should buy the book and read it. And I think they should read it in groups, because I think it's an opening of a door to a world that they've been excluded from. But the question for me is, if you're the leader of an organization and you know you're in trouble, but you can't tell anyone, but you in your gut know that you're in trouble, and your tendency is to go out and look for the expert who's going to come in and give you a model and give you a plan and give you a structure and give for change and all of that, and in your gut you know that that's not the answer, but you don't know what to do otherwise because all the things of your experience has been shunted towards expertise and models and artificial systems that don't apply to the context. All those things that you all describe here, that's the experience of most leaders. And so to me, the challenge, the first challenge is to break people of their dependence upon all these things which have been destructive of their life and their businesses. And one of the things that I came to see was that if you're the CEO of a company, or you're the general manager, or you're a departmental manager, what is your number one job? I think your number
Increasing
one,
requisite variety.
well,
Increasing requisite variety. That's it.
well,
If you do that, everything will be fine.
let me describe it in the way I have been seeing it. I think your job is now to facilitate the development of leadership in all your people, which I think is exactly what you're saying.
I
And
don't think you need leadership. No. I think this is a big myth that the glorious leader will turn up and lead us out of the
but you
dark.
see,
He's not saying that,
the,
Adam.
but that's not the leadership that I see as leadership. That is management. That is management with a marketing program. Now, what I'm talking about leadership is people who are doing things out of their own initiative to make things better. They're communicating better. They're solving problems. They're innovating. That sort of thing. That's
So
Yeah.
that
So,
to me is what
so yeah, right. So,
it's a bit
what
triggering,
you're
this.
talking about is the difference between, so, I mean, the way you increase requisite variety is you give people more degrees of freedom.
That's right.
So you push authority. So the
Yeah.
classical view has always been hierarchical.
Mhm.
It's the authority rests at the top, and that goes all the way back to the Ford. The authority rests, and the whole idea of scientific management was the workers aren't smart enough, so you need the scientists and the managers to tell people what to do. You need to simplify the job for the people. They don't understand. But in the new world, to be competitive, what you have to do is not minimize the skills of your people, but maximize the use of the skills of the people. You've got to open up degrees of freedom. So, I mean, that's, again, going back to flexible manufacturing, what Tachi Ono did is he gave every work on the line the power to stop the line.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the opposite. That pushes the power, the authority down to the people who are nearest and who are best able to diagnose the problems. So if they see a flaw, they can stop the line, and then you can't start the line until you diagnose the problem and solve it.
It flips the
Okay,
pyramid.
that would never have worked in a top-down organization. In a top-down organization, nobody can stop the line until you get up to the CEO, and then you got to get his permission to stop the line. And the thing is centralized control, and this goes all the way back to economies, to Hayek, and to the things that centralize, very highly centralized organizations. It takes them too long to collect all the information and then to act on that information. By the time Hayek made this point long time ago that no matter how, if you have a centralized economy, no matter how smart the people are at the top of the thing, for them to collect all the information they need and then to make a decision about what this farmer is going to grow or that farmer is going to grow, it takes so long, but the decision is always going to be too late and dollars short. But if you give the farmers the degree of freedom to decide, okay, and so first of all, the farmers have to decide what they're going to grow, but you also have to give them information. You have to have markets and prices, and you have to have that public's available so that they can know what's going to pay off to them. And so the economy works when the people are responding to the local situations, but they have information that's relevant to the global, to the market. So they have to, we see the same thing in emergency response. So in emergency response, one of the key things is the incident command center. But if you look at the doctrine and the way it's done well, the incident command center is not the controller of the organization. The role of the incident command center is to make sure that the people on the ground have the information that they need to make the right choices. So the problem is the guys on the ground can't see the big picture. So they can't see, where the firemen might not see where the police are or and so the incident command gives them information so they know what, the person on one side of the town has a resource that somebody else on the other side of town knows. Well, incident command can know where the resources are and where the needs are, and they can let the people on the ground know, and then they can decide how to get it and distribute it. But if the people on the ground, on one side of town have to go up and get permission to take what they need to, and that's going to be too long. But if they have a map and it's being updated and they can see where the changes are and see who needs what they have, then they can respond without getting permission, and they can respond quickly. And so that's, in terms of when you say requisite variety, I mean, I don't think that means much to people. Increase requisite variety. What does it mean to increase requisite variety? What it means is to push the degrees of freedom. The problem with hierarchical, the problem with organizations, the problem with scientific management, it took all degrees of freedom away from workers. So all they did was went screw. They had no choice. They had to follow they had their little thing to solve. But organizations that have become more adaptive when they give the people on the sharp end, the people who understand the problems, the degrees of freedom to adapt to the local information. Because it takes too long to get all the local information up to a central command. The people have the local information. If they have a common goal, if they know what the intention of the organization is, then they can make smart adaptations. And it's the same in the military. In the military, they call this mission command. So the role of the commander is not to tell the field officers what to do. It's to tell them what the goal is. Because it takes too long, we learned that from Vietnam, it takes too long to get the situation, describe the situation to the commanders in DC, and then wait for their instructions. By that time, they understand the situation and they get back to you, it's too late. You've already lost.
And that's what I mean by facilitation. So the senior leadership sees their role as not directive, but rather they're facilitating. They're asking the question, what is it that you need to do your very best work? And given that this is our purpose as a company, what is it that you need so that we can achieve that goal? And everyone from the janitor all the way up to the CEO is responsible for their little piece of that pie. That's why I say you flip the pyramid on its top.
Right.
And the CEO is looking upward through the whole system to see what is it they need to do the work that needs to be done to.
Can I give you an example that I think might help? Because I've been working on a solution to this problem. It sounds bad, but I've been working on a way of addressing this particular issue.
Sure.
And it seems to me that with AI, we have an awful lot of assistance in solving problems like this. So let's say we have a CEO. We ask him what's his biggest problem, and he tells us. We can put that problem into AI, Claude, and say, what are the enabling business capabilities of this type of problem? And it'll give you a list of them all. And you just project that on your organization and go, who are these people in these places? And you take your VSM in each of those capabilities and you go, who's the policy guy? Who's the intelligence guy? Who's the coordinator? Who's the control guy? And who's the operator? And you get them working as a VSM by asking the questions. We've already defined the questions. And they'll tell you, across these capabilities that are around this problem space, this is what's going on. This is where we lack requisite variety. This is where we lack autonomy. This is where we lack all these different things. And you get a report out of that. And it will take a day. That's it. To do this entire piece of work. And in the end of the day, you can give the CEO back his report and go, this problem can be addressed like this. And the people in those capabilities will do the work. You don't need consultants. You don't need anybody coming in. They already know what needs to be done. They're sat there with these problems. And you say, well, do you want to fix them? Yeah, we do. Go on then. Fix what you think you need to fix to make this thing effective at what it does. And they will do it and keep doing that. And therefore, these things are now adaptive. And keep that communication going between those 5 people. And they're just perspectives. They're not roles. It's not an organizational design. It's just I want 5 perspectives in that place.
And I think that is what is the product of this book. Is that perspective which someone, let's go to that perspective is the product of this book. The ability to see things like that. And that's why I think this book is really important. And it's simple, it's a conversation, but it's really good. We've kind of run up against our hard stop, and we may have some more conversation about this in the future. I thank you both for being here. You know, if you want to have a last pitch for the book, because I think without there being, I think you all being in conversation about the book with people, I think would be really fantastic. So, I know, John, you need to go. Maybe you have a last word for us.
Well, just one clarifying. So Adam keeps saying VSM as if everybody knows what that is. I don't think it's so he's talking about the viable systems model.
Sorry.
And
Okay.
but I just want to clarify. I mean, I think the viable systems model is not really a model. It's kind of a framework for building models and for how and for critiquing models. And so, on the one hand, we don't want to, our message is that no model is complete, but then on the other hand, we don't want to be selling, VSM is the answer. It's a framework for thinking about, but it's not a model in the mathematical.
Communication. It's a communicating tool. Who needs to talk to who about what?
Yeah. It's a framework for asking questions at multiple levels, and for understanding some of the constraints of the different models. So I just don't want to come across as criticizing.
But use ours.
People leap on the models and then say, "Well, use our model. Our model's the right one." And it's not about this. It's
no.
And that's why the book is a conversation. It's not it's about exploring. It's about stimulating curiosity, not about the answer, the solution from on high on these things.
Right. Adam, you had anything to add to end
No, just to back up what John said about the VSM, really. I use it as a mental model, just a way of laying out things to make sure that I've got the things that are important. But it is just a communication framework that I use it for, in terms of who should be talking to who about what. And by knowing that, we make sure those conversations happen. And then when those conversations happen, what emerges is what needs to be done. It's quite effective at that. But yeah, it's not. I'm not pushing my model. It's not my model. It's Stafford Beer's models.
Well, thank you, guys.
Again, it's a framework, not for building models.
Yeah. It's a framework. It's a framework. It should be called VSF.
I hate to put it this way, but smart people get trapped in their own language, and that's we're getting. We understand what we're talking about. And we'll use all kinds of language to get there. But at the end of the day, the question is, can you operate within the context that you're given to create the movement forward that you really want? And that it's never the same. It's never certain. Nothing's ever follows a rigid model or anything like that. It's always a matter of how do you, I think the whole thing of adapting, which is all through this book, is really the key. How do you learn to adapt? And you do it in business, but you also do it in your own personal life.
We do it anyway. What stops us is management and their models.
Well,
and they insist that we don't adapt. They insist that we stay with the old.
That's right. Stay in
Well,
your
it doesn't work.
stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane.
It's also, I think, a really important thing is in the vision in terms of the span. And the thing is, so just go back to the Tachiono, when the guy stops the production center, that means things aren't rolling off the end and stuff. It means you're not generating flawed cars, but there's a cost to that. There's a near-term cost, but a long-term benefit. And it's the same thing, almost in sports. I use this analogy, if you're a golfer and you go to a coach in golf, almost universally, your game gets worse before it gets better. Because part of the challenge is to break the old, you kind of have to break the old habits and create new degrees of freedom, new ways of doing things that are more productive. But the problem is that they're driving they're looking down at the road right in front of the car rather than looking down the road. And people talk about holistic, but a lot is the time frame. And one of the reasons it's hard to implement is because when managers lose control, there's a little bit of confusion and things don't get better right away. It takes time to invert the pyramid, as Ed says. And you've got to trust, and you've got to take a long-term view, in terms of the health of your people, the value of your organization. But it's this pursuit of short-term returns that makes it difficult for a lot of organizations to actually act on these ideas.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your work, and
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
We'll get
Appreciate
together
you too.
and do some more. So I'm going to do a kind of an out thing after you guys go, as a way of finishing this off. Okay. Hope the appointment with the doctor goes well, John.
Yeah. Good to see you, John.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Thank you, Adam.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
I think what Adam Walls and John Flach have done in a very simple way is given us a gift that if you take it seriously and you read their book, Do Systems Exist? I think you will find that you'll be given ideas and perspective which will be fresh and inviting and will make sense to you. I've read through this and I really like all of it. And it is not an academic book. It is not the traditional business book. It is a conversation between these two guys who know each other, but come from very different worlds. And I encourage you to read this book. You find the link to the book in the show notes of this episode. And I think if you're interested in what they're saying and you take it to heart, then you will be able to see your own sense of purpose and well-being growing. I see this as one of the first pieces of literature that helps to define what the future is going to look like. And they're not doing it to define the future. That's not what their purpose is. But if you take this book seriously and you apply it to your situation, to your context, I think you will see how you can make simple changes that were not evident to you before, but they are now. And if you need help, you can contact both of them, or you can contact me, because these are the questions that we live with. These are the things that we see as we move through our lives of work. And we see how difficult it is to lead organizations when everything is prescribed. And so if you want to change that, then you have to open it up and you have to step away from being directive to being consultative. And you're consulting with all your people. And you're saying, what do you need? How can I help you? What is it that is inhibiting you from doing your best work? When you hear that kind of language and you've not been that kind of person, you're going to get people resisting because they don't know whether to trust you. And so part of what happens when you decide that you're going to change the way you operate is that you have to say to your people, I have seen things that I want to be different, and I want to change, and I need your help. And you have to say to them, I welcome your input, and whatever input you give me will not threaten your work, will not threaten your job. And when you are able to be that kind of transparent with your people, then they know that you have gone through some kind of transformation in your own self-perception and that you are now free to be the leader that you're meant to be. Leadership is not a role, it's not a title, it's not celebrity, it's not recognition, it's not a position of influence. Leadership is what you do that makes a difference, that matters. And do you even know, if you're the head of a company, the owner of a company, the general manager of a division of a company, do you even know the effect of your work? And I would guess that you don't. So I would encourage you to read Adam and John's book. I would encourage you to read The Circle of Impact, because these are tools for changing your perceptions, changing your mind. And if you need help, you just ask. Because I believe that if you do seek help and you do learn how to change, and you do learn how to change the organization where you were in a position of responsibility, that you will find many different things happening, some of them good, some of them hard, but long term, you will find that you have gained a perspective and a capacity for impact that you didn't know existed. So Adam and John and I may talk some more about this because I think it's really important. We'll see. And if you really want to know more, just reach out to us. Ask, because that's what you want your people to do. If they want more, if they want to know more, if they need better or different training, you want them to say, I need training in this area. You want them to say that. You want them to help. You want to help them. You want to help them do their best. Because what's going to happen as AI takes over more and more of the world is that the people that you want working for you, you want the most talented people you can find, and the people who have the best work character. And if you're not supporting them, then they're not going to stay with you, and they're going to leave. And that's the reality that you face. So, am I saying you're backed into a corner? You're not backed into a corner yet, but you may find yourself in that place in the near future if you don't change. So, do systems exist? Not as we think they do, but there's a lot there that you can learn from John and Adam, and I And I suggest that you do. I suggest you read their book. Thank you for watching the Eddie Network podcast. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the YouTube version and to the Substack version so that we know that you're there, and offer your thoughts, your comments, your questions. And all of those will be treated with respect, and we would enjoy being in conversation with you. And I thank you, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.